Welcome to Serenity Fire, the podcast where wellness meets grit. I'm your host, Krista Guagenti, founder of Panacea Luxury Spa Boutique. Join me as we dive into the intriguing world of biohacking, clean living, cutting-edge spa trends, and the hustle, grind, and grit of entrepreneurship. From my personal battles with weight management, infertility, and a 30-year journey to create and launch my dream business, to building a sanctuary for those who have been touched by cancer, I'm here to share real talk, inspire big dreams, and spark a passion for holistic living inside each and every one of you. So let's dive in. Welcome back to Serenity and Fire. Today, we're going to dive deeper into hormones, and I want to start with a question, and that is, have you ever found yourself saying, I just don't feel like myself anymore? Not because you're sick or because something is broken, but because something just feels different. You're exhausted. You're gaining weight despite doing the same things you've always done. Your sleep isn't what it used to be. Your patience is shorter. Your anxiety is higher. Your motivation is lower. Your brain feels foggy. Your confidence feels different. Your sex drive may have actually disappeared completely. And perhaps most frustrating of all, if that's not bad enough, is that you go to the doctor, you get blood work, and you're told everything looks normal. So then what? You probably start questioning yourself and thinking, maybe it's just stress, or maybe I'm just getting old. Maybe you start thinking that you're just not disciplined enough, and maybe you feel like everyone else has it all figured out and you're just somehow failing. I know that feeling, and if you've ever felt that way, I want you to know something. The body is constantly communicating with us. The problem is that most of us were never taught how to listen to those cues and signals. And one of the most powerful ways that the body communicates is through its hormones. So today we're going to discuss why so many people, men and women, reach a point where they suddenly just feel disconnected from themselves, why they feel off, why they feel different, and why hormones may be playing a much bigger role than what most people realize. So let's dive into this conversation. And first, I want to say that I think one of the biggest misconceptions in modern health is that we've been taught to view the body like a machine. Eat less, exercise more, work harder, drink more water, get better results. Simple. Except that's not how it always works, especially as we age, and especially when hormones begin changing and when stress accumulates, because the body is not just a simple input-output machine. The body is an adaptive system. It's constantly collecting information about stress, sleep, recovery, nutrition, inflammation, safety, hormone levels, energy availability, and then it adjusts accordingly. The body adapts, the body compensates, the body protects, the body conserves. And sometimes those adaptations show up as symptoms. That's why two people can eat the exact same diet and get completely different results. Two people can also follow the exact same exercise plan and also get completely different outcomes. Two people can also have identical lab values and feel completely different. And that's because the body's not a calculator. You can't just input all the numbers and get the same answer every time. The body's a living, adaptive system. And perhaps even more importantly, the body is a messenger. So when symptoms appear, they're often not random. They're communication, they're clues, they're information. And one of the most important communication systems in our bodies is the hormone system. So again, the body is not just a simple input-output machine. It's an adaptive system, and the body is also a messenger. So when we start looking at symptoms as communication instead of failure, the conversation changes. And that brings us to this whole topic of hormones. So let's get into the basics of what hormones actually are. Because while hormones are actually talked about a lot in mainstream, they're rarely ever explained clearly. So hormones are chemical messengers. That's it. That's their job. They carry instructions throughout the body. So think of them as your body's communication network. Every second of every day, hormones are sending messages that influence metabolism, sleep, mood, stress response, reproduction, muscle growth, recovery, hunger, energy production, cognition, and yes, you guessed it, libido. Almost literally everything. And here's one of the most important concepts in this entire episode for you to hear. And that is that hormones don't operate in isolation. They perform like an orchestra. You can't understand estrogen without understanding progesterone, and you can't understand testosterone without also understanding cortisol. You also can't understand weight gain without understanding insulin, and you cannot understand energy without also understanding thyroid hormones. Everything is connected, and that means symptoms often have multiple causes. Symptoms also have multiple causes. And sometimes people talk about hormones as though they're misbehaving in some way, like they've suddenly just gone rogue. But I think a more accurate way to really think about the whole hormone picture is that they're responding to aging, environment, stress, and the changing needs of the body. Because hormones are influenced by age, sleep, stress, inflammation, nutrient status, toxic overload, as well as illness and recovery, understanding all of that moves us away from blame and toward curiosity. So instead of asking, what's wrong with me? How about we start asking, what is my body trying to tell me? So now let's meet some of the major members of the hormone orchestra. Estrogen is probably one of the most misunderstood hormones in this orchestra because most people think estrogen is just for women and testosterone is just for men, but that's not actually true. Both men and women produce and need estrogen. Women simply just produce significantly more. And estrogen influences everything from brain function, memory, mood, cardiovascular health, and collagen health to skin health, bone density, metabolism, and reproductive health, which is why fluctuations in estrogen can cause such dramatic changes in how people feel. Many women entering perimenopause begin experiencing anxiety, brain fog, sleep disruption, irritability, hot flashes, and weight changes. And they often don't realize that estrogen may actually be contributing to all of these symptoms. Now, let's go back to something that I just mentioned a minute ago, and that is the fact that men actually need estrogen too. In fact, men naturally produce estrogen every day. So how is that happening? Well, it's because some of their testosterone is converted into estrogen through an enzyme called aromatase. I talked about this in one of my previous episodes. That process is known as aromatization. And despite what many people believe, this is not a mistake or the body doing something wrong. It's exactly how the body was designed to work. And in men, estrogen contributes to libido, erectile dysfunction, bone density, cardiovascular health, mood, recovery, and even brain health. In other words, estrogen is not just a female hormone, it's a human hormone. Men just simply require different amounts than women. Now, here's where things get interesting with estrogen, because for years, particularly in testosterone replacement therapy clinics, there was tremendous concern that estrogen levels could become too high in men. Why? Well, it's because elevated estrogen can sometimes contribute to symptoms such as water retention, breast tissue development, which is called gynecomastia, as well as emotional sensitivity and reduced libido in some men. And because of those concerns, many providers actually began prescribing medications known as aromatase inhibitors. Examples of those include anastrozole, letrozole, and aromasin. These medications work by blocking the conversion of testosterone into estrogen. And the thinking was that if estrogen is causing problems, let's lower it, which sounded logical, but over time, we learned something really important. And that is that just because a hormone can become too high doesn't mean it should be driven as low as possible. So in some cases, the pendulum swung too far. Men were being placed on testosterone while simultaneously taking medications designed to prevent their bodies from making estrogen. And many of those men started experiencing things like low libido, erectile dysfunction, fatigue, brain fog, depression, anxiety, joint pain, and poor recovery. Ironically, many of the exact same symptoms they were trying to improve with testosterone, they were prohibiting with these aromatase inhibitors. So the goal isn't to eliminate estrogen altogether. The goal is balance. So think of testosterone as a gas pedal in a car. Testosterone helps drive motivation, energy, confidence, libido, and muscle development. But a car needs more than just a gas pedal. It also needs steering, suspension, alignment, and brakes. And estrogen helps support many of those other symptoms. So if testosterone is the gas pedal, estrogen is part of the steering and suspension system. You need both. Adding more gas doesn't automatically make the vehicle perform better if the rest of the car isn't functioning properly. And that's exactly how hormones work. The goal isn't maximizing one hormone while eliminating another. The goal, again, is balance. Now let's continue this discussion by talking about another hormone called progesterone. Because if estrogen is often thought of as the queen of hormones, progesterone is often the calming influence. And honestly, I don't think progesterone gets nearly enough of the attention it deserves because progesterone plays a role in sleep, mood, stress resilience, emotional regulation, and reproductive health. And many women don't realize that one of the earliest hormonal changes that can occur during perimenopause is actually a decline in progesterone. And quite honestly, from a personal perspective, you all know that I've had significant infertility issues. And I really, truly think that those issues were the earliest sign for me that I was in perimenopause. So I think even when Jason and I were trying to have kids and we were having so many failed pregnancies, I think that my progesterone actually was way too low. And I don't think that my fertility specialist did enough to really check that and make sure that I was at the levels I needed to be in. And I even brought it up to them at one point in time. And they were like, no, your progesterone's fine. But I really do think that that was a major contributor to why we weren't able to successfully have a full pregnancy. And I was in my mid to late 30s when we first started trying to have kids, and all the way into my early 40s. And so I do think that that hormonal change was happening, and I was probably already in perimenopause and just didn't realize it. And for whatever reason, my physicians didn't realize it or pay attention to it either. That said, I think that this is just one other indication that long before estrogen fully declines, women have other hormonal symptoms going on, like what I just mentioned. And they also may be noticing symptoms such as anxiety, poor sleep, irritability, feeling overwhelmed, feeling emotionally reactive, and also that feeling of wired but tired. And because these symptoms often feel so emotional, many women often just assume that they're simply stressed or that something is wrong with them psychologically. But in many cases, biology is part of the conversation. I can't tell you how many women, including myself, that I've spoken to who say, I don't know why I feel this way. I'm anxious all of the time. I can't turn my brain off. I wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and I can't get back to sleep. And as we just learned, sometimes those symptoms are actually connected to changing hormone levels. So now let's talk about testosterone. Today, I'm going to focus on the big picture of this hormone, but if you'd like a much deeper dive into testosterone specifically, I encourage you to listen to my dedicated testosterone episode because I spent an entire show discussing this topic in detail. Most people tend to associate testosterone with muscle, strength, and masculinity, but testosterone affects so much more than that. It helps support motivation, confidence, drive, muscle preservation, cognitive performance, recovery, and libido. And this applies to both men and women. Women need testosterone too. So just like how men need estrogen, women need testosterone. Not in the same amounts as men, but they absolutely need it. And one of the most common things I hear from people whose testosterone levels have declined is that they just don't feel driven anymore. Not depressed and not necessarily sad, just different, less motivated, less interested, more tired, less ambitious, less engaged. And that's often how hormone changes show up in our bodies, not as dramatic symptoms, but as subtle shifts in your life experiences. And one of the conversations that everyone is thinking about is something that affects millions of people and yet remains one of the least openly discussed subjects in health, and that is sex drive. Desire, libido. Because one of the most common questions people have is, what the heck happened to my sex drive? It was so different when we first got together. It was so different when I was younger, but now it's completely changed. And here's what I want people to understand. This whole situation is much deeper than just you being older. It definitely links back to our hormones, but libido is not controlled by just one hormone. It's influenced by many, including testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, cortisol, thyroid hormone, insulin, and even nervous system regulation. And all of these systems interact with one another. But many people tend to assume that libido is simply about attraction, but it's so much more complex than that. Libido is often a reflection of overall biological capacity. Think about it. If someone is exhausted, overwhelmed, anxious, sleep deprived, chronically stressed, and inflamed, the body begins reallocating resources, and reproduction, which includes our libido, starts moving lower on that priority list. In other words, the body starts prioritizing survival over reproduction and, yes, unfortunately, sex. So libido isn't just about attraction. It's about whether the brain and body have enough capacity left to desire it. So when testosterone declines, people will often report, I just don't think about sex anymore. I just don't have the drive for it anymore. I know that that was something that definitely happened to me. And when estrogen declines, comfort may change, sensitivity may change, vaginal tissues may change. And if intimacy becomes uncomfortable, the brain begins to create associations around that experience. And when cortisol remains elevated, the body says, we have way bigger problems right now. And biologically, reproduction becomes much less important. So a low sex drive isn't always a relationship problem. Sometimes it's a hormone conversation. And thankfully, that was definitely the case for me. So if you're a man listening right now, please don't tune out because hormones definitely affect you too. But there's another reason I want you here in this conversation, and that's because women spend many years feeling misunderstood during perimenopause and menopause. Their bodies are changing. Their sleep is changing. Their moods are changing. Their libido may be changing, unfortunately. Their anxiety may be changing. And often the people around them just don't understand why. If you've listened to my menopause episode, you know I spent an entire show discussing this transition into perimenopause and menopause in much greater detail. But it does deserve mention again here because, again, it's one of the biggest reasons women start to say, I don't feel like myself anymore. Perimenopause, as you know, is that transition leading up to menopause. And for many women, as was the case for me, it begins years before they expect it, and sometimes even before their physicians even realize it. And the symptoms may include anxiety, insomnia, brain fog, mood swings, weight gain, menstrual cycle changes, fatigue, low libido, and hot flashes. And unfortunately, many women are told by their physicians, you're fine. Your labs are normal. You're just aging. But many women intuitively know that something is changing, and often they're right. And I definitely believe that that was the case for me when I was going through my infertility journey. I just unfortunately didn't know enough about this to push harder. But what I've also learned is that perimenopause isn't the beginning of the end. It's just a biological transition. And while men don't experience menopause in the same way that women do, they absolutely experience hormonal changes. Their testosterone levels naturally decline. Men also experience stress accumulation, their sleep quality changes, recovery capacities change, and their metabolic health changes. And many men also begin experiencing fatigue, weight gain, reduced motivation, lower libido, slower recovery, and decreased muscle mass. And just like women, many assume that they're just getting older. And sometimes that is part of the story, but hormones may be a bigger part of the conversation too. Another hormone that we need to talk about is the stress hormone cortisol. Many people often tell me, I know stress is affecting me, but then they get a cortisol test and it comes back normal. And then they become really confused. Well, here's the problem. Cortisol is dynamic. It changes throughout the day. So a single blood draw is simply a snapshot, not the entire movie. Imagine taking one photograph during a football game or a basketball game or whatever it is. Can you determine how the game unfolded from that one single picture? Probably not. So you need to see the whole game. And the same is true with cortisol. Someone can actually have normal morning cortisol, poor sleep, elevated evening cortisol, chronic sympathetic elevation, poor recovery, and low heart rate variability all at the same time. So normal cortisol doesn't always mean a healthy stress response because we're not just interested in a number, we're interested in a pattern. We're interested in recovery, resilience, adaptability, and nervous system regulation. And that's why I've become so passionate about recovery. I just recently did a whole episode on this because sometimes the issue isn't that we're producing too much cortisol, it's that we're spending too much time living in a stress-dominant state. So from there, let's talk about another area that creates tremendous confusion in this whole conversation of hormones, and that's the thyroid. One of the challenges with thyroid health is that many people think thyroid testing is simply, what's your TSH? And while TSH is important, it doesn't always tell the entire story. The thyroid system functions a bit like a thermostat. TSH stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. It's produced by your pituitary gland, and its job is to send instructions. Think of TSH as the text message telling the thyroid, hey, we need more thyroid hormone. The thyroid then responds primarily by producing T4. T4 is often called the storage hormone. It's largely inactive, so think of it as potential energy waiting to be converted. And when that energy is needed, then the body converts that T4 into T3. T3 is considered the active hormone. This is the hormone actually influencing metabolism, body temperature, digestion, energy production, cognition, hair growth, and skin health. So when it comes to thyroid hormones, you don't necessarily feel your TSH levels. You just feel the downstream effects of the thyroid function as a whole. And this is where things really get interesting because sometimes the body converts T4 into that active T3, but sometimes it converts T4 into something called reverse T3. Reverse T3 is basically the emergency brake of the car. If active T3 is saying, hey, let's go, reverse T3 is saying, let's slow down. The body may increase reverse T3 production during chronic stress, illness, inflammation, severe caloric restriction, and also prolonged psychological stress. It's essentially saying, hey, now is not the time to be running at full speed. So when reverse T3 rises, less T4 becomes active T3, which may contribute to symptoms such as fatigue, brain fog, sluggishness, cold intolerance, and difficulty losing weight, even when your thyroid markers appear normal in your lab tests. It's important to note that not all practitioners agree on the clinical value of reverse T3 testing. Opinions really do vary within the medical community. However, it is a marker that some integrative and functional medicine providers may consider when evaluating more complex thyroid cases. And if we're evaluating thyroid health comprehensively, some practitioners may look at TSH, free T4, free T3, and sometimes something called TPO or thyroid peroxidase antibodies, as well as thyroglobulin antibodies. These antibody tests can help identify autoimmune thyroid conditions such as Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is one of the most common causes of hypothyroidism. And interestingly, some people may have elevated antibodies long before major abnormalities appear on standard thyroid testing. One reason I think these conversations matter so much is because many people spend years being told your labs are normal, yet they just don't feel normal. Now, symptoms don't automatically mean that you have a thyroid problem, but sometimes they do deserve investigation because health is not just about treating numbers, it's about understanding the person behind the numbers. For example, many conventional guidelines suggest that a TSH somewhere roughly between 0.5 and 4.0 may be considered normal, but individuals are not reference ranges. We've talked about this on many of my shows. They're human beings and they need to be treated that way. And for me personally, I've learned that when my TSH begins getting above 0.8, I start noticing changes, weight gain, energy changes, metabolic changes. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody should be at 0.8. I don't mean that at all. It just means that your health is individualized. You're not a lab value, you are a person. So the goal is not to chase perfect lab values. The goal is to understand what your body is trying to tell you. And honestly, this brings us back to the importance of recovery. As I mentioned in my recovery episode at Panacea, one of our core values is this. In order to truly rest, recover, and refuel your body, mind, and spirit, we all need and deserve the opportunity to disconnect from the outside world and experience the healing benefits spa services can provide. I really, truly believe in that deeply because modern humans are not just hormone deficient. Many are recovery deficient. They're overstimulated, overwhelmed, overconnected, overworked, underslept. And as I mentioned in that episode, eventually the body starts to keep score through fatigue, anxiety, poor sleep, burnout, weight gain, hormone disruption, and brain fog. So again, the body can't prioritize hormone balance when it's focused on survival. So what can you do? Well, you need to prioritize sleep, build muscle, eat protein, manage stress, reduce those toxic loads, move your body, get outside, and support your recovery. And perhaps most importantly, you need to test. Don't guess. Understand your body, learn your patterns, pay attention to symptoms because symptoms are often messages, not malfunctions. So if you take one thing from my episode today, I hope it's this. You're not broken. Your body is just communicating with you, and hormones may be one of the most important parts of that conversation. The goal isn't to fight your body. The goal is to understand it, to support it, to work with it. Because when we do, we don't just feel better, we function better, we age differently, and we show up differently for the people we love. And ultimately, that's what wellness should really be about. In my next episode, I'm going to be tackling one of the most controversial conversations in hormone health, and that is around the topic of bioidentical versus synthetic hormones. So what's the difference? What's the marketing around it? What's the science? What's safe? What's risky? And what should people actually know before making decisions about hormone therapy? So as we wrap up, I want to thank you so much for spending this time with me today. If you're in a place where you have been struggling with the things I talked about on today's show, I hope this conversation gave you the answers you're looking for, because on this show and at Panacea Luxury Spa Boutique, we're all about helping you feel your best. So if you have more questions about this topic, definitely message into the show and I'll do my best to get the answers you're looking for. And if you have additional insight on this topic or personal experiences that you've had on this hormone journey, please share, because I love hearing from you. In closing, please remember that everything shared on Serenity Fire is meant for general inspiration and information purposes only. The topics we discuss are not intended to diagnose, treat, or replace personalized medical care. So please always consult with your healthcare provider regarding your individual health concerns, lab results, medications, and treatment decisions before trying anything we talk about on the show. Your health is unique and your care should be too. So that's it for today's episode. If this conversation inspired you, the best way to support the show is to follow, leave a review, and share the show with those you love most. And with that, please remember to protect your peace, support your recovery, listen to your body, and know that if you're not feeling like yourself lately, your symptoms may be trying to tell you something really important. Until next time, keep balancing serenity with fire. I'm Krista Guagenti, and I'll talk with you more in our next episode. At Panacea Luxury Spa Boutique, we don't just offer traditional spa treatments. We create rituals that relax your mind, restore your health, and rejuvenate your spirit. From biohacking technologies to advanced oncology-trained care, everything we do is designed to help you heal on the deepest level with clean, holistic therapies, products, and amenities that are second to none. And right now, you can experience two of my favorites, our whole body LED light bed or hyperbaric oxygen therapies. And as a thank you for listening, you'll get 10% off your first session when you use the code Serenity10 at booking. What is your panacea? Let us help you find it, because true wellness isn't a quick fix, it's a ritual.